I always believed that there are loyal women out there. It's funny how we convince ourselves that we're special, that we're different, and that somehow our story will never take a wrong turn. I thought Lisa was one of the good ones. She had that warm smile, the kind that makes you forget about your worries. And the way she laughed made me believe that life, with all its ups and downs, would always be bearable as long as she was by my side. I was one of those men who believed that bad women deserved consequences. It sounds harsh, I know, but in my mind, loyalty was the foundation of everything good. And Lisa, well, she was my anchor. I thought she'd never be capable of betrayal. I had these moments, little flashes of doubt, but I'd shake them off. No way. My Lisa? She'd never do that. I trusted her, and I trusted in our love. I used to daydream about the two of us growing old together, sitting on a porch somewhere, watching the sunset. I had this image in my head, holding her hand, laughing about the good times, the tough times, and how we made it through everything. The dream was always about happiness until the very end. I wanted that more than anything. It's a beautiful thought, isn't it? To think that love can conquer it all. That's what I told myself anyway. But deep down, there was always this fear, a nagging voice in the back of my mind that would ask, what if? What if everything I had was fragile, built on illusions? I feared that one day I might discover a truth that would shatter everything I believed in. But every time that fear came up, I pushed it down. I reassured myself with the thought that Lisa couldn't do something like that. She was my partner, my love, and I thought she felt the same. It's ironic, really. I had desires, simple ones. I didn't want riches or fame. All I wanted was a loyal, lovely woman by my side. I thought I'd found her. I really believed that we were different, that our love was strong enough to withstand anything. And it's not just about loyalty, it's about being seen, being understood. Lisa was that for me, or at least I thought she was. The truth is, I wasn't perfect. I had my failures. I wasn't the wealthiest guy. I didn't have the highest status, and I never really had much success with women before Lisa. I think that's part of what made me cling to her even more. She made me feel like I was enough, like I had something worth holding on to. And in return, I put her on a pedestal, believing she was incapable of hurting me the way I feared others might. But there was always this lingering suspicion, an almost subconscious whisper that maybe, just maybe, I was being naive. Was I setting myself up for a fall? Was this too good to be true? I told myself those thoughts were irrational, just fears from my past or insecurities creeping in. But the thoughts never fully went away. I thought I knew what loyalty looked like, what love should feel like. I was so sure that my dreams were real, that my fears were just shadows with no substance. I never imagined that my reality would be tested, that my belief bubble was something that could pop so easily, leaving me questioning everything I ever knew. It started on an ordinary day, a day like any other. I was at home, busy with mundane things, when there was a knock on the door. I remember it vividly because there was nothing particularly remarkable about it. Just a neighbor standing there, looking a little uncomfortable. I thought it was going to be a casual conversation, maybe about the lawn or something trivial, but I could tell from their face that it wasn't. He hesitated, and in that pause, my mind raced with all sorts of possibilities. But what he said next, I never saw coming. He said he'd seen Lisa. He saw her with someone else, a man who wasn't me. He described him, casually dropping in that he was wealthy. My heart sank. My first reaction was disbelief. No, he had to be mistaken. Lisa wouldn't do that. My Lisa. I couldn't believe it. I nodded. I listened. But it was like I was outside of myself, watching this moment unfold from a distance. It felt like everything around me slowed down. The neighbor kept talking, his voice sounding farther and farther away, but my thoughts drowned out his words. A part of me wanted to shut the door, to tell him he was wrong, that he was out of line, but I didn't. I just stood there, frozen, holding on to whatever shred of hope I could find. The description of this man lingered in my mind. Wealthy, confident. It felt like a dagger because deep down, I knew these were things I had always felt insecure about. I wasn't the wealthiest guy. I didn't have the flashiest career. And now, to hear that my wife had been seen with someone who embodied everything I wasn't, that hurt more than I could have imagined. After the neighbor left, I just sat there. I couldn't move, couldn't think. My mind kept replaying his words, trying to find a loophole, a way to discredit what he had said. Maybe it was all a mistake. Maybe he saw someone else. Maybe Lisa was meeting him for work. Or maybe she was helping someone out. I clung to every possible excuse, trying to fight the rising panic within me. But even as I tried to rationalize it, there was a part of me that knew. It was that same quiet voice that had whispered to me all along, the one I always ignored. That nagging suspicion that maybe I was being naive, that maybe my fears were more than just shadows. And now, here it was, staring me in the face, refusing to be silenced any longer. The rest of the day was a blur. I went through the motions, but nothing felt real. Every time I looked at a picture of Lisa, every time I thought about her, there was this gnawing doubt that ate away at me. I wanted to call her, to ask her outright, but I couldn't. I wasn't ready for that conversation. I wasn't ready for my belief bubble to completely shatter. I wasn't ready for the truth. And yet deep down, I already knew. A part of me knew that things would never be the same again. That whatever I chose to do next, whatever I chose to believe, there was no going back. The life I thought I had, the love I believed in, it was all starting to feel like an illusion. And I was terrified of what I'd find if I looked too closely. The days after hearing the neighbor's words were a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I found myself in this strange space between denial and dread. My mind was a battlefield. One moment, I would convince myself that the neighbor was wrong, that he must have misunderstood what he saw. The next moment, the doubts would come rushing back, pulling me under like a powerful wave. It was like I was on a carousel that wouldn't stop spinning, each thought more terrifying than the last. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee, watching the steam rise and disappear. I'd spent hours at that table, going over everything, every little moment I could remember with Lisa. I replayed every smile, every kiss, every time she said she loved me. I tried to find clues, something I missed, something that could either confirm or deny what I'd been told. And with every memory, there was this crushing sense of helplessness. I wanted so badly to believe that Lisa wouldn't do this. I wanted to believe that our love was different. But the doubt, it was relentless. It kept gnawing at me, eating away at the foundation I thought was unshakable. One night I found myself scrolling through her social media, looking for anything, any small detail that could tell me something was wrong. I hated myself for doing it, hated the fact that I was becoming suspicious of the woman I loved. But I couldn't help it. I was desperate. I was desperate to either prove or disprove my fears, to finally find some peace, no matter how painful it might be. The worst part was that there was nothing there, no clear answers, just more questions, more uncertainty. I started paying more attention to her when she got home. The way she spoke to me, the way her smile seemed a little forced, her eyes a little distant. I noticed every small thing, every little crack in her demeanor that I had never noticed before, and each one felt like a stab to the heart. I wanted to ask her outright, but I was terrified of the answer. I knew that once I asked, there would be no going back. Once those words were spoken, the truth, whatever it was, would be out there, and I couldn't pretend anymore. The emotional turmoil was unbearable. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with all these thoughts, all these fears. I'd hear Lisa next to me, breathing softly, and I'd wonder if she was dreaming of him, the other man. The image of her with someone else haunted me. It was like a movie that wouldn't stop playing in my head. I saw them laughing together, holding hands, sharing the kind of moments that used to be ours. And each time, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I remember one evening she came home late. She had a smile on her face, but it wasn't for me. She looked happy, really happy, and for the first time, I hated seeing her that way, because in that moment, I realized that her happiness wasn't because of me anymore. I felt like an outsider looking in, like the man she used to love had been replaced by someone else, someone richer, someone better. I tried to smile back, tried to pretend that everything was normal, but inside, I was crumbling. My world was falling apart, and I didn't know how to stop it. Every time she'd say, "I love you," I'd wonder if she meant it. I'd wonder if it was just something she said out of habit or out of guilt, and each time, I felt my heart break a little more. I started to question everything, our entire relationship, every moment we'd ever shared. Was it all a lie? Was I just a placeholder until someone better came along? The thoughts were suffocating, relentless, and I felt like I was drowning in my own mind. There were moments I'd think about confronting her, about demanding the truth. I imagined the conversation 1,000 times. What I'd say, how she'd respond. I imagined her denying it, getting angry, or worse, admitting it, confirming every fear I had. But no matter how many times I imagined it, I couldn't bring myself to do it. Because deep down, I knew that once I knew the truth, everything would change. And I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to let go of the life I thought I had, of the love I thought was real. So I kept pretending. I kept going through the motions, hoping that somehow, some way, this nightmare would end, and I'd wake up to find that everything was okay. But it wasn't okay, and the more I tried to hold on, the more everything seemed to slip through my fingers. I was losing her, and I was losing myself in the process. And the worst part was, I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to make it right. I can't pinpoint the exact moment it all began to unravel, but it was like a slow-motion collapse, one that I was forced to watch, powerless to stop. It wasn't loud, and it didn't happen all at once. It was the silence that killed me. The kind of silence that creeps in between two people who used to be everything to each other. The small routines we used to have, those little things that made us feel connected, started fading away. We used to have coffee together in the mornings. She'd smile at me, and we'd talk about our plans for the day, our dreams for the future. It was the best part of my morning. But now, she seemed to be in a rush. She'd drink her coffee without meeting my eyes, and those conversations we used to have turned into one-word answers and awkward pauses. I'd sit there, hoping she'd open up, say something that would make me feel close to her again. But she didn't. The gap between us kept widening, and I felt like I was losing her, inch by inch, every single day. The laughter disappeared too. Lisa used to have this incredible way of making even the hardest days feel lighter. We'd joke around, tease each other about little things, and it always made me feel like we were a team, like we could handle anything as long as we had each other. But now, it felt forced. Her laugh, once warm and genuine, felt like a hollow echo. She laughed, but her eyes didn't smile. I knew that smile wasn't for me anymore, and every time I saw it, I felt like I was losing a part of her that I could never get back. I remember one evening she came home with a gift, a bottle of expensive wine. She said a client had given it to her as a thank you, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right. There was a distance in her voice, a hint of guilt she tried to hide behind a smile. We opened the wine, and I tried to enjoy it with her, but it felt like there was an invisible wall between us, something that words couldn't break through. I wanted to ask her who the gift was really from, but I was scared of what I might hear. So I stayed silent, sipping that wine with her, pretending everything was fine, even though every sip felt like swallowing glass. Nights became the hardest. Lying in bed beside her, feeling the emptiness between us, I used to reach out for her, just to hold her close, just to remind myself that she was still mine. But now, I hesitated. The distance between us wasn't just emotional, it was physical too. I'd reach out and stop halfway, my hand hovering in the darkness, afraid that if I touched her, she'd pull away. That fear of rejection, of seeing the truth I didn't want to face, kept me from reaching out. And so, I lay there, night after night, feeling her next to me, but knowing she was miles away. There was one night that broke me. She was sitting on the couch, staring at her phone, smiling at a message. She looked so happy, so at ease, and for a split second, I thought about asking her what was so funny, but then I stopped myself. I realized I didn't want to know, because I knew that smile wasn't because of me. It felt like I was being replaced, like the life we had built together was slipping away, one secret smile at a time. I went to bed that night feeling like a ghost, like a shadow of the man I used to be, and I knew that the marriage I was clinging to was no longer there. It was just the shell of what it used to be. The hardest part was pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. I'd see friends, and they'd ask me how Lisa was, and I'd force a smile, saying she was great. I'd tell myself I was protecting our marriage by not talking about it, by not letting others see the cracks. But deep down, I knew I was just protecting myself from the truth. I was too scared to admit that I was watching the love of my life slip away, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I tried. God, I tried. I'd plan little surprises for her. Dinners, flowers, anything to remind her of what we had. But she'd thank me with a distant smile, her eyes betraying no excitement, no joy. It felt like I was reaching out, trying to hold on to something that had already slipped through my fingers. Every attempt was met with a cold distance, and each time it hurt a little more. The more I tried, the more I realized that maybe I was fighting a battle that was already lost. Watching my marriage fall apart was like watching a storm from inside a fragile house. I could see the winds tearing at the walls, the roof coming loose, but I couldn't stop it. I could only watch, helpless, as the love I thought would last forever crumbled before my eyes, and all I could do was brace myself for the inevitable collapse, knowing that the person I loved most in the world had already started building a life without me. There comes a point when the doubt and the silence begin to turn inward. The questions that once started with, "Why is she doing this?" became "What's wrong with me?" I found myself staring into the mirror, unable to recognize the man looking back. I looked tired. Lines on my face that weren't there before, bags under my eyes from the nights spent tossing and turning. But it wasn't just about my appearance. It was about who I was, who I thought I was, and who I feared I had become. When did I become so unlovable? That was the question that haunted me the most. I kept replaying my life choices, the career path that didn't lead to riches, the times I chose stability over ambition, the comfort I found in our simple, predictable routines. I had thought these were good things, the things that made me a reliable partner. But now, I saw them all as failures. I wasn't wealthy. I didn't have the status, the charm, or the success that this other man seemed to have. And the worst part was, I started to believe that Lisa was right to look for more. Maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe I never had been. I tried to pinpoint the exact moment I failed. Was it when I stopped taking her out to fancy places because we needed to save money? Was it when I got comfortable, thinking that love was enough to sustain us? I had always believed that loyalty and love were the most important things. But now I questioned whether those things mattered at all. Maybe it was all about the money, the status, the kind of lifestyle I could never provide. I was losing myself in these thoughts, and it felt like my identity, the person I'd always thought I was slipping away. There were days when I couldn't even muster the strength to get out of bed. I felt like I had nothing to offer to Lisa or to anyone else. What kind of man was I if I couldn't even keep my wife interested, if I couldn't make her happy? The weight of that realization crushed me. It felt like everything I'd worked for, everything I believed about myself, had been a lie. I'd built my self-worth on the idea that I was a good partner, a loving husband. But now, it seemed like none of that mattered. I was failing at the one thing that mattered most to me, my marriage. Even at work, I started to feel like an imposter. I'd sit at my desk, staring blankly at my computer, feeling like I was barely holding it together. My confidence was shattered. I couldn't focus, couldn't find the motivation that used to come naturally. It was like a fog had settled over my mind, making every small task feel impossible. I worried that my colleagues could see right through me, that they knew something was wrong. And honestly, a part of me didn't care. I felt so disconnected from everything that even the fear of losing my job seemed distant. I was already losing everything that mattered. Socially, it was just as hard. When friends would invite me out, I'd make excuses. I couldn't bear to put on a happy face and pretend that everything was fine. I didn't want to hear about their lives, their successes, their happy relationships, because it only reminded me of what I was losing. I started isolating myself, retreating into a shell that felt safer, even if it was lonelier. It was easier to be alone with my thoughts than to face the world and the constant reminders of my failures. One night, I remember sitting alone on the couch, the TV on in the background. But I wasn't watching. I was staring at our wedding photo on the shelf across the room. I looked at my own face in that picture, smiling, full of hope, full of love, and I didn't recognize that man anymore. He was someone who believed in forever, someone who thought he had it all figured out. But now, all I could see was the gap between that man and the person I had become. The hope was gone. The love had turned into something bitter, something that left a hole inside me that I didn't know how to fill. I started questioning everything about myself, my choices, my worth, my ability to love and be loved. If Lisa, the person who had vowed to be with me forever, could betray me, then maybe I wasn't worth loving at all. It was a dark, heavy thought, one that settled deep in my chest and refused to leave. I tried to fight it, to tell myself that it wasn't true, but it was hard to believe that when everything around me seemed to prove otherwise. There were fleeting moments of anger. Anger at Lisa for what she was doing, anger at the man she was with, but mostly anger at myself. How had I let it come to this? How had I missed the signs, ignored the warnings? I blamed myself for being naive, for believing in the kind of love that lasts forever. I felt foolish, like a child who still believed in fairy tales, while the rest of the world had grown up and moved on to something more real. It was an identity crisis that shook me to my core. Who was I if I wasn't Lisa's husband? Who was I if I wasn't enough? These questions plagued me, and I didn't have any answers. I felt stripped of everything that once defined me, left standing alone with nothing but my fears and doubts. It was like my entire life had been built on shaky ground, and now everything was collapsing, leaving me lost and broken. In those moments, I couldn't see a way out. I couldn't imagine a future where I felt whole again. All I knew was that the man I used to be was gone, and I wasn't sure who I was supposed to be now. The uncertainty was suffocating, and I felt like I was drowning in my own sense of worthlessness. It was a battle within myself, and every day I felt like I was losing a little more of who I used to be. The decision to confront Lisa wasn't one that I made lightly. It was something I struggled with for days, maybe even weeks. Every time I thought about it, I felt a tightening in my chest, a fear that gripped me so strongly that it almost paralyzed me. But I knew I couldn't go on like this. The doubt, the fear, the constant feeling that I was losing my grip on reality. It was too much. I needed answers. I needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. It was a Thursday evening when I finally found the courage. She had come home late again. She offered a quick excuse, something about work running late. She smiled, but it was a distant smile, and she didn't meet my eyes. I watched her as she walked into the kitchen, her back to me, and something inside me snapped. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't pretend, couldn't play along with this charade. I needed to know. I needed to hear her say it. "Lisa, we need to talk," I said, my voice coming out more strained than I intended. She paused, her back still to me, and I saw her shoulders tense. She knew. I could see it in the way she hesitated, the way she slowly turned to face me. There was something in her eyes, a mix of fear, guilt, maybe even resignation, that made my heart drop. I knew in that moment that whatever she was about to say would change everything. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but my voice still shook as I spoke. "Is there someone else?" The words hung in the air between us, heavy and terrifying. I could see her face change, the color draining from her cheeks. She didn't answer right away. She just stared at me, her mouth opening slightly as if she wanted to say something. But no words came out. The silence was unbearable. Every second felt like an eternity, and with each passing moment, the hope that maybe I was wrong, that maybe this was all a misunderstanding, slipped further away. "Why would you ask that?" she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. It wasn't a denial. It wasn't the vehement rejection I had hoped for. It was a stall, a delay, and I could see the truth in her eyes even before she spoke. "Please, just tell me," I said, my voice breaking. "I need to know. I deserve to know." There was a moment of silence, and then she looked away, her eyes focusing on the floor. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice trembling. It just happened." I felt my heart shatter in that instant. The room seemed to close in on me. the walls pressing in, the air thick and suffocating. I tried to breathe, but it felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. She was saying the words I feared the most, and there was nothing I could do to stop them. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice barely audible. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "It doesn't matter," she said. "I love you. I really do. I never wanted to hurt you." Her words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. It didn't matter. How could she say that? How could she stand there and tell me that it didn't matter when it was tearing my entire world apart? I could feel the anger rising in me, anger that I had been holding back for so long. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this," I said, my voice shaking. "You wouldn't have lied to me, betrayed me." "How long, Lisa? How long have you been seeing him?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with regret, and I could see her struggling to find the words. "A few months," she finally said, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "A few months." The words echoed in my mind, and I felt my legs give out. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. All those nights, all those smiles, all those lies. She had been living a double life, and I had been too blind to see it. The realization was devastating. Everything I thought I knew, everything I believed in, had been a lie. She tried to come closer, reaching out to touch me, but I pulled away. "Don't," I said, my voice hoarse. "Just don't." I couldn't stand the thought of her touch, not now, not when I knew where her hands had been, who she had been with. It felt like everything about her was tainted, and the love I once felt had turned into something dark and painful. She started crying, her sobs filling the silence between us. But I couldn't comfort her. I couldn't even look at her. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain that I was feeling. But instead, I just sat there, staring at the floor, my mind numb. The anger, the sadness, the betrayal. It all felt too much to process. I was overwhelmed, drowning in emotions I couldn't even begin to untangle. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." But her apologies felt empty. They couldn't undo the damage that had been done. They couldn't bring back the trust, the love, the life we had shared. I looked at her, my eyes meeting hers, and all I could see was a stranger. The woman I had loved, the woman I thought I knew, was gone. And all that was left was this broken version of her, someone who had shattered everything we had built. For a moment, I felt a wave of desperation. I wanted to turn back time, to go back to the days when everything was simple, when I believed in us. But I knew I couldn't. I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The truth was out, and there was no way to take it back. We were standing on the edge of something I couldn't define, something terrifying, and I didn't know if we could ever come back from it. I stood up, my legs feeling weak beneath me. "I need time," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I need to think." I walked away from her, away from the tears, away from the pain that hung heavy in the air. I didn't know where I was going, didn't know what the next steps would be. All I knew was that I needed to get away, to find some way to breathe again. And as I closed the door behind me, I knew that whatever happened next, it would never be the same. After that night, everything seemed to exist in a blur. I moved through the days as if I were on autopilot, functioning just enough to get by. My mind, however, was constantly on fire, grappling with the one impossible question. Should I stay or should I leave? It wasn't just a simple decision. It was the decision that would define the rest of my life. And every time I tried to settle on an answer, The weight of it felt unbearable. I would sit alone, replaying every conversation, every argument, every "I'm sorry" that Lisa had whispered through her tears. A part of me still loved her. A part of me still wanted to believe that we could get through this, that somehow we could rebuild what we had lost. I thought about the years we had spent together, the laughter, the dreams, the promises. It felt impossible to just walk away from all of that. How could I turn my back on the life we had built together, no matter how shattered it had become? But then there was the other side, the side that screamed at me to leave, to run as far away from the pain as I could. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him. I imagined them together, and it made my skin crawl. The thought of staying, of waking up next to her, knowing she had given herself to someone else, it felt like a poison, slowly seeping into my veins. How could I ever trust her again? How could I ever look at her and not see the betrayal? The questions gnawed at me, eating away at any hope I had left. There were moments when I thought about confronting her again, demanding more answers. I wanted to know every detail. When it started, what they did, what she felt when she was with him. I wanted to understand how she could do this to us, but then I'd stop myself, because I knew that no answer she gave would make it better. It would only make the wound deeper, the pain more unbearable. And yet, the not knowing, the uncertainty, was its own kind of torture. One night, I found myself sitting in our living room, the house dark and silent around me. Lisa was asleep in the other room, and I just sat there, staring at nothing, feeling the crushing weight of the decision I had to make. I tried to picture my life without her. I imagined packing my things, leaving this house, starting over somewhere new. The thought of it was terrifying. I had built my life around her, around us. She was my home, my family, and the idea of walking away felt like tearing myself apart. But then, I imagined staying. I imagined trying to move past this, pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. I imagined the nights lying next to her, the mornings pretending to smile, the constant, gnawing doubt that would never leave. I imagined the rest of my life haunted by the shadow of what she had done, by the ghost of the trust that had been broken. And that thought, that future, felt even more terrifying. I was torn between two impossible choices. On one hand, there was the comfort of what I knew, the familiarity of the life we had built. On the other, there was the unknown, a future without her, a future that I couldn't even begin to imagine. I knew that no matter what I chose, there would be pain, there would be loss, and I didn't know if I was strong enough to face either option. Lisa tried to reach out to me during those days. She'd look at me, her eyes filled with tears, begging for a chance to make things right. She'd say she loved me, that she was willing to do whatever it took to fix things. But every time she said those words, all I could feel was the emptiness behind them. I wanted to believe her. I really did, but it felt like the connection between us had been severed. And no matter how hard she tried, there was no way to bridge that gap. I remember one moment that almost broke me. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where we used to share coffee and dreams. She reached across, taking my hand, her eyes filled with hope. "I know I messed up," she said, her voice breaking, "but I love you, and I want to fix this. Please give us another chance." Her hand felt warm, familiar, and for a moment, I almost gave in. I almost let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. But then, I looked into her eyes, and all I could see was the betrayal. All I could see was the image of her with someone else. The lies, the nights she came home late, the empty smiles. I pulled my hand away, the pain too much to bear. "I don't know if I can do this," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you." Her tears fell, and I felt my own eyes well up, but I couldn't let myself break in front of her. Not again. The truth was, I didn't know if I was capable of forgiveness. I didn't know if I could ever look at her without seeing the betrayal, without feeling the pain that had taken root deep inside me. I wanted to be that person, the person who could forgive, who could move on, who could rebuild. But I wasn't sure if that was who I was anymore. The love I had for her was still there, buried beneath the hurt, but it was tangled up in so much pain and anger that I couldn't untangle it. In the end, I knew that staying would mean losing myself. It would mean sacrificing my own happiness, my own peace of mind, for a relationship that was already broken. And as much as I loved her, as much as I wanted to hold on, I realized that I couldn't do that to myself. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay, that we could go back to what we once had. It wasn't fair to me, and it wasn't fair to her either. I needed to let go. I needed to find a way to move forward, even if it meant walking away from the life I thought I'd have. It was the hardest decision I'd ever made, but I knew that I couldn't keep living in the past, in the shadows of what we used to be. I needed to find myself again, to rebuild my life on my own terms. And as much as it broke my heart, I knew that leaving was the only way to do that. So I made my choice. I decided to leave, to let go of the life that had defined me for so long. I packed my things, each item a painful reminder of what I was losing, but also a step towards something new, something that might one day bring me peace. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I had to take that first step. No matter how scared I was, I had to choose myself, even if it meant breaking my own heart in the process. Leaving Lisa was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but what came after felt almost harder, facing the world alone. I'd spent so many years with her by my side that the thought of reaching out to anyone else felt foreign, almost impossible. I had always prided myself on being strong, on being able to handle things myself, but now, for the first time, I realized that maybe I wasn't as strong as I thought. Maybe, just maybe, I needed help. The first person I turned to was my best friend, Mark. We hadn't talked much in recent months. Life had a way of getting in the way, and I had distanced myself without even realizing it. But the night I left Lisa, I found myself sitting in my car, parked outside his house, staring at his front door. I was terrified of admitting that I had failed, that my marriage was over, that I wasn't the man I thought I was. But I couldn't bring myself to drive away. I needed someone, even if I wasn't ready to admit it. I finally got out of the car, my legs feeling weak, and knocked on his door. It was late, and I half expected him to be asleep, but he answered almost immediately, his face filled with concern the moment he saw me. "Hey man, what's going on?" he asked, and that was all it took. I felt the tears welling up, my chest tightening, and before I knew it, I was crying, really crying. The kind of tears that come from a place so deep inside that you didn't even know it existed. Mark didn't say anything. He just pulled me into a hug, and I broke down, the weight of everything finally pouring out. We sat in his living room for hours that night. I told him everything, the affair, the doubts, the pain. I laid it all out there, every raw, ugly detail. And he just listened. He didn't judge, didn't try to offer solutions, didn't tell me what I should or shouldn't have done. He just listened, And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel so alone. I realized then how much I had missed that feeling. Having someone there who cared, someone who saw me, not the broken version of me, but the person I used to be, the person I could be again. Mark wasn't the only one. Slowly, I began to reach out to others, family, old friends, people I hadn't talked to in ages. At first, it was hard. It felt like every conversation was a reminder of my failure, of what I had lost. But as time went on, I realized that these people weren't judging me. They weren't seeing me as the guy who got cheated on or the guy whose marriage had fallen apart. They were just there, offering their support, reminding me that I wasn't defined by this one terrible chapter of my life. I remember one afternoon, I went to visit my mum. She knew something was wrong the moment she saw me, and I didn't even have to say the words. She just pulled me into her arms, and for a moment, I felt like a child again, seeking comfort in the one place that had always felt safe. She didn't ask questions, didn't press me for details. She just held me, and I realized how much I had missed that feeling. The simple comfort of being loved unconditionally, without expectations or demands. It was a kind of love that I hadn't felt in a long time, and it reminded me that there was still good in my life, still people who cared about me. There were days when I didn't want to see anyone, when the idea of talking about what happened felt like too much. But those were the days when I needed my friends and family the most. Mark would show up unannounced, dragging me out for a walk or just sitting with me in silence. My mum would call, her voice gentle, asking if I'd eaten, if I was taking care of myself. These small gestures, these simple acts of love, were what kept me going. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that even in my darkest moments, there were people who would stand by me no matter what. One night, Mark took me to a small gathering with a few friends. I didn't want to go. I was tired, drained, and the thought of facing people felt overwhelming. But he insisted, and eventually I gave in. I remember walking in, feeling out of place, like I was carrying a weight that no one else could see. But then, something happened. My friends greeted me with warmth, with laughter, with the kind of familiarity that I had missed so much. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of normalcy. I laughed, genuinely laughed, and for those few hours, I almost forgot about the pain. I realized then that healing wasn't something I could do alone. I needed these people, these moments, to remind me of who I was beyond the heartbreak. The support of my friends and family didn't fix everything. It didn't take away the pain or make the betrayal any easier to bear. But it gave me something to hold on to. It gave me hope. It reminded me that there was still love in my life, still people who believed in me, even when I couldn't believe in myself. And slowly, day by day, I began to see a way forward. It wasn't clear, and it wasn't easy, but it was there. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel completely lost. I knew that, no matter what happened, I had people who would stand by me, who would help me pick up the pieces and start again. After leaning on my friends and family, I realized that as much as their support helped me through the darkest days, the journey to truly heal and rebuild had to be my own. I had to find myself again, not the person I had been with Lisa, but the person I was before, or maybe even someone entirely new. It wasn't about just getting over her or moving on from the betrayal. It was about piecing myself back together after being shattered and figuring out who I wanted to be without her. The first step was getting out of my comfort zone, which, at that point, had become a very dark and lonely place. I decided to start small. I signed up for a gym membership. I'd always been the kind of guy who found excuses not to work out. Too busy, too tired. But now, it was something I could do for myself. The first day was brutal. I remember standing in front of all those machines, feeling out of place, unsure of where to even begin. But I forced myself to do it. One step at a time, one workout at a time. I pushed through the discomfort, the soreness, and slowly it became a routine. The gym wasn't just about getting physically stronger, it was about finding a sense of control again. With each session, I could feel myself growing, not just in strength, but in confidence. The weights, the exercises, they were something I could control, something that was mine. And each time I walked out of the gym, drenched in sweat, but feeling a little lighter, I knew I was making progress. It wasn't a lot, and it wasn't fast, but it was something. It was me, taking control of my own life, of my own body, and it felt good. But physical strength was only part of it. My mind was still a battlefield, and I knew I needed to face the emotional side of things too. I started journaling, a suggestion from my mom, who said it might help me make sense of everything I was feeling. I remember sitting down with that blank notebook, the empty pages staring back at me, and feeling overwhelmed by where to even start. But once I put the pen to paper, the words started to flow. I wrote about everything: the anger, the sadness, the betrayal, the good memories, and the bad. It was painful, bringing all those emotions to the surface, but it was also cathartic. It was like I was releasing all the poison that had been building up inside me, letting it flow out onto the pages. Journaling helped me see things more clearly. I began to understand that what happened wasn't my fault. It wasn't because I wasn't good enough or because I lacked something. Lisa made her choices, and those choices were hers alone. That realization didn't take away the pain, but it did take away some of the blame I had been putting on myself. It allowed me to start forgiving myself for the things I couldn't control, for the love that wasn't enough to keep her from leaving. I also decided to pursue something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time for: learning to play guitar. It was something I'd mentioned to Lisa a few times over the years, something I always put off because I was too busy with work or with us. But now I had time. I needed something that brought me joy, something that was just for me. I bought a cheap guitar and started watching tutorials online. At first, it was frustrating. My fingers felt clumsy and the strings hurt my fingertips, but I kept at it, practicing every day, and slowly I started to make music. Simple chords, a few notes, but it felt like a victory. It was something new, something that wasn't tainted by the memories of what I had lost. As the weeks went by, I began to see changes, not just in the way I looked or the things I could do, but in the way I felt. I started waking up with a sense of purpose again. The days didn't feel as empty, as hopeless. I began to look forward to things: my workouts, my guitar practice, even the small victories like cooking a meal for myself or finishing a difficult journal entry. It was like I was rediscovering the world, one small piece at a time, and with each new discovery, I felt a little more like myself. There were still bad days, days when the weight of everything came crashing down, when I'd hear a song that reminded me of Lisa, or see a couple holding hands and feel that familiar pang of loss. But I was learning that those moments didn't have to define me. They were just moments, fleeting, passing, and I could choose to let them go. I had control over how I responded, over whether I let the sadness consume me or whether I took a deep breath and kept moving forward. I also began to reconnect with the world around me. I started going out more, meeting friends for dinner, saying yes to invitations that I would have once turned down. One of those invitations was to a hiking trip that Mark had organized. I wasn't much of an outdoorsman, but I went anyway. It was tough, physically exhausting, mentally challenging, but when we reached the top of the trail and I looked out at the view, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of peace. It was beautiful, and for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The journey to rebuild wasn't easy, and it wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, moments when I felt like I was back at square one. But each time I fell, I got back up. I kept going, kept pushing myself, because I knew that the only way to truly heal was to keep moving forward. I was learning to be okay with being on my own, to find joy in the simple things, to take pride in the small victories. I was learning to love myself again, and that more than anything was what I needed. Slowly, I began to see a future, one that didn't include Lisa, but one that was full of possibility nonetheless. I realized that my life wasn't over just because one chapter had ended. There were still so many pages left to write, so many experiences left to have, and I was ready to start writing them. I was ready to build a life that was mine, a life that wasn't defined by anyone else but me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I felt like I could breathe again, like I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. I was still on the journey, but I knew I was moving in the right direction. And that was enough.
Time, a sense of peace. It was beautiful, and for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The journey to rebuild wasn't easy, and it wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, moments when I felt like I was back at square one. But each time I fell, I got back up. I kept going, kept pushing myself, because I knew that the only way to truly heal was to keep moving forward. I was learning to be okay with being on my own, to find joy in the simple things, to take pride in the small victories. I was learning to love myself again, and that, more than anything, was what I needed. Slowly, I began to see a future, one that didn't include Lisa, but one that was full of possibility nonetheless. I realized that my life wasn't over just because one chapter had ended. There were still so many pages left to write, so many experiences left to have, and I was ready to start writing them. I was ready to build a life that was mine, a life that wasn't defined by anyone else but me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I felt like I could breathe again, like I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. I was still on the journey, but I knew I was moving in the right direction, and that was enough.
It was something I didn't expect, meeting someone new. I wasn't looking for it. In fact, the idea of dating again, of opening my heart after everything that had happened, seemed impossible. I was still healing, still trying to piece myself back together, and the thought of letting someone in felt too risky. But as life often does, it brought someone into my path when I least expected it. It started simply. I was at a cafe, the one I had begun frequenting on weekends, where I'd spend hours with my guitar or a book, savoring the small victories of being comfortable in my own company. It was there that I met her, Emily. She was sitting at the table next to mine, struggling with a book that I happened to know well. I remember noticing her frowning at the page, her pen tapping against the table in frustration. For some reason, maybe out of the newfound confidence I'd been building, I leaned over and offered to help. "Tough book?" I asked, smiling, and she looked up, her eyes meeting mine, and she smiled back. What started as a casual conversation turned into something more. We chatted about the book, then about music, and then about life in general. There was something easy about talking to her. I hadn't felt that in a long time. Just a natural connection, without any expectations or pressure. I found myself laughing, really laughing, and it took me by surprise how much I enjoyed her company. She was warm, funny, and kind, and for the first time, I felt a spark of something I thought I'd lost forever, a connection that felt genuine and real. We ended up exchanging numbers that day, and it felt like a step into the unknown. I was hesitant, of course. The idea of letting someone new into my life was terrifying. I had built walls around my heart, walls I wasn't sure I was ready to let down. But something about Emily made me want to take that risk, even if it was just a small one. I told myself I'd take it slow, that I wouldn't get ahead of myself, that this was just two people getting to know each other. And that was exactly what I needed. Something simple, something that didn't come with the weight of expectations. Our first official meeting after that was a casual coffee date. I remember feeling nervous, my palms sweating slightly as I waited for her at the cafe. When she walked in, all smiles and warmth, the tension seemed to melt away. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. I found myself opening up to her in ways I hadn't expected, talking about my love for music, the hiking trip with my friends, even my journey of learning to play the guitar. She listened, genuinely interested, and there was no judgment, no pressure, just acceptance. I didn't tell her about Lisa right away. I wasn't ready for that. I wanted to keep this new chapter separate from the pain of my past. But as our meetings turned into more dates, and those dates turned into something that began to feel like a relationship, I knew I had to tell her. It was one of those nights when we were sitting at the park, the sun setting in the distance, and she looked at me, her eyes filled with a kindness that made me feel safe. I took a deep breath and told her about my past, about Lisa, the affair, the pain, the struggle to rebuild myself. I expected her to pull away, to see me differently, to see the broken parts of me and decide that it wasn't worth the trouble. But she didn't. She listened, her hand resting on mine, her eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, she simply said, "I'm so sorry you went through that." There was no pity, no awkwardness, just understanding. And for the first time, I felt like I could breathe. I realized that maybe, just maybe, I was capable of trusting again. Maybe I could let someone in, and they wouldn't hurt me. It was a small glimmer of hope, but it was enough. We took things slowly, very slowly. I wasn't ready to rush into anything, and she understood that. We went on walks, we had coffee, we talked late into the night about everything under the sun. And with each passing day, I found myself letting my guard down, bit by bit. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the fear crept back in. Moments when I'd pull away, afraid of getting too close, afraid of the possibility of being hurt again. But Emily was patient. She never pushed, never made me feel like I had to be anything other than myself. And that, more than anything, made me want to try. One day, I played my guitar for her. It was something I'd never done for anyone else. I wasn't very good yet, and I was self-conscious about it. But she asked me, her eyes filled with genuine curiosity, and I found myself saying yes. I played a simple song, my fingers trembling slightly as I strummed the chords. When I finished, she smiled, her eyes glistening, and she told me it was beautiful. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just about the music. It was about letting myself be vulnerable, letting someone see me, flaws and all, and realizing that maybe I was worth loving after all. Emily wasn't Lisa. She didn't fill the void Lisa left. She wasn't a replacement. She was something entirely different. Someone who made me realize that my worth wasn't tied to the past, that the betrayal I had experienced didn't define me. She showed me that love didn't have to be complicated or painful. It could be simple, kind, and real. And that realization, that feeling of hope and possibility, was something I had thought I'd lost forever. Meeting Emily was the beginning of something new. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about embracing the future, about realizing that there was still so much left to experience, so much left to feel. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready for it. I was ready to take the risk, to open my heart again, and to believe that happiness was still possible. It was a slow journey, a cautious one, but with each step, I felt myself coming back to life. And that, more than anything, was the greatest gift I could have asked for. There was something about Emily that made me feel like I was seeing the world in color again, after so long in gray. It wasn't like some magical switch flipped, but more like the sun rising slowly after a long, dark night, bringing warmth, light, and clarity back into my life. For the longest time, I had thought that kind of happiness was lost to me, buried under layers of betrayal and pain. But as Emily and I grew closer, I found myself rediscovering what joy truly felt like. Our relationship wasn't a whirlwind romance. It didn't have grand gestures or drama. It was the small things that mattered. The way she would reach for my hand when we were walking together, her fingers lightly brushing against mine, and how that simple touch would make my heart swell. The way she listened, really listened, when I spoke, making me feel heard and understood, something I hadn't felt in a long time. And the way she made me laugh, without trying, without forcing it, as if the laughter had always been there, waiting for her to bring it out. One weekend, Emily suggested that we take a small road trip. Nothing extravagant, just a day trip to a nearby town with a scenic trail and a quiet lake. It was something simple, but it was also something I hadn't done in ages. I hadn't realized just how much I'd missed these kinds of spontaneous adventures. The feeling of being carefree, even if just for a little while. We spent the day hiking, taking in the views and sitting by the lake, dipping our feet in the cool water. There, under the shade of an old oak tree, I felt it, a deep sense of peace, a kind of contentment that I hadn't felt in so long. It was like all the broken pieces of my heart were starting to find their place again, and they were slowly mending. It wasn't just the moments of fun and adventure that made me realize I was falling in love again. It was the quiet moments too, the times when we didn't need words, like the time I had a particularly hard day, memories of Lisa creeping back in, the doubts trying to find their way into my mind. Emily noticed without me even saying a word. She didn't ask questions, didn't push me to talk. She just sat with me, her head resting on my shoulder, her presence a silent reassurance that I wasn't alone. In that moment, I realized that love didn't always need words or grand gestures. Sometimes it was just about being there, about understanding without needing explanations. There was one evening when it all clicked for me. Emily and I were in my small kitchen, cooking dinner together. It was nothing fancy, just pasta and some vegetables. We moved around the kitchen, bumping into each other, laughing when she tried to stir the sauce and accidentally splashed some on her shirt. It was messy, chaotic, and perfect. At one point, I looked at her face flushed from laughing, her eyes sparkling, and I felt something shift inside me. It was like all the pieces of my past, the hurt, the betrayal, the loss, fell away, leaving only this moment, pure and simple. I realized then that I wasn't just happy. I was in love, and it was a different kind of love. It wasn't weighed down by the expectations and fears that had once haunted me. It was lighter, freer, built on a foundation of understanding, trust, and kindness. I wasn't trying to prove anything, and neither was she. We were just two people, choosing to be together, and that choice made all the difference. It wasn't about needing each other to fill some void or fix some broken part of ourselves. It was about wanting to share our lives, our moments, with each other, and that was enough. Of course, there were still moments of fear. The scars from my past hadn't disappeared. They were still there, reminders of the pain I'd endured. But Emily never made me feel like I had to hide those scars. She accepted them, accepted me, and in doing so, she helped me accept myself. She helped me see that my worth wasn't defined by what had happened to me, but by who I was and who I was becoming. And that realization was liberating. It allowed me to open my heart fully, to embrace the love that was in front of me without fear. One night, after dinner, we sat on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching some old movie that neither of us was paying much attention to. Emily turned to me, her eyes meeting mine, and she smiled. That smile that always seemed to reach deep into my heart. "I'm happy," she said, her voice soft, and in that moment, I knew that I was too. I leaned in, kissed her gently, and whispered, "Me too." It was simple, but it was everything. I had thought that my chance at happiness had ended when Lisa walked out of my life. I had believed that the betrayal had taken away my ability to love, to trust, to feel truly happy again. But sitting there, with Emily by my side, I realized that happiness wasn't something that could be taken away. It was something that I had found within myself, and it was something that I could share. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't without its challenges, but it was real, and it was mine, and that made all the difference. Falling in love with Emily didn't erase the past, but it gave me a new future to look forward to. It gave me hope, the kind of hope that made me excited to wake up each day, to see where life would take us. I knew there would be ups and downs, that no relationship was without its challenges. But I also knew that I wasn't alone, and I wasn't afraid anymore. I had found a love that was built on honesty, on acceptance, on a deep understanding of who we were as individuals. And for the first time, I truly believed that I was deserving of this happiness. Life had taken me through a journey I never expected, a journey through heartbreak, loss, and rediscovery. But through it all, I had found something beautiful, something worth holding on to. I had found love again, and as I looked at Emily, her head resting on my shoulder, her eyes closing as she began to drift off to sleep, I knew that this was just the beginning. A new chapter, a new love, and a happiness I had never thought I'd find again. Looking back now, it's strange to think about how much has changed. It feels like a different lifetime, like the person I was back then, lost, heartbroken, struggling to find a way forward, was someone else entirely. And yet, I remember every part of that journey vividly. The pain, the doubt, the nights spent questioning myself. It all feels like it happened just yesterday, and at the same time, like a distant memory that I've finally made peace with. There's a kind of acceptance that comes with time, a realization that not everything in life will go the way you planned, and that's okay. When Lisa left, I thought my story was over. I thought the future I'd envisioned for myself had been ripped away, and there was nothing left for me. But now I know that life is not just about the plans we make. It's about how we respond when those plans fall apart. It's about picking up the pieces and finding a way to create something new, something beautiful, even if it looks different than what you imagined. I've let go of the anger I once felt for Lisa. I used to think that bad people deserved punishment, that betrayal should come with consequences. But now, I realize that holding on to that anger only kept me tied to the past. It kept me from moving forward, from embracing the happiness that was waiting for me. Lisa made her choices, and I made mine. I chose to let go. I chose to forgive, not just her but myself, for all the ways I thought I had failed. And in that forgiveness, I found freedom. Emily and I are building a life together, one that is filled with love, laughter, and an openness that I never thought I'd be capable of again. I've learned that love doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't need grand gestures or the kind of romance you see in movies. It just needs two people willing to be vulnerable, willing to be honest, and willing to choose each other every day. And that's what we're doing, choosing each other, one day at a time. I no longer carry the weight of feeling like I wasn't enough. The journey I went through showed me that my worth isn't defined by someone else's choices or by what I can provide materially. It's defined by who I am, by my kindness, my resilience, my ability to love deeply, despite the scars. And those scars, they're not marks of failure. They're reminders of what I've been through, what I've overcome, and the strength it took to get here. There was one moment, not too long ago, that really brought everything into perspective. Emily and I were at a small gathering with some friends, and someone asked me about my past, about what brought me to where I am today. I hesitated, not wanting to dive into the painful details, but Emily looked at me, her eyes filled with understanding, and gave my hand a gentle squeeze. In that moment, I realized that I wasn't defined by that heartbreak anymore. It was part of my story, yes, but it wasn't the whole story. It was just one chapter, and the chapters that came after were filled with growth, with love, with hope. For a long time, I thought my happiness was tied to one person, one relationship. But now I know that my happiness is my own. It comes from within, from the choices I make, from the life I build. Emily is a part of that happiness, but she's not the sole source of it. And that realization has made all the difference. It has allowed me to love her fully, without fear, without the burden of old insecurities. It has allowed me to be present, to appreciate every moment we share, without worrying about what might happen tomorrow. I've come to understand that life is a journey, and it's full of unexpected twists and turns. There will be joy, there will be pain, and there will be moments when you feel like you've lost your way. But as long as you keep moving forward, as long as you keep choosing to see the beauty in the world, even when it's hard, you'll find your way. And sometimes what you find is even more beautiful than what you thought you'd lost. I'm grateful for where I am now. I'm grateful for the love I have, for the person I've become, and for the journey that brought me here. It wasn't easy. It was messy, painful, and filled with moments of doubt. But it was mine, and it led me to a place of peace and happiness that I never thought I'd find again. As I sit here now, with Emily by my side, I can finally say that I'm at peace. The past no longer holds me back. The future no longer terrifies me. I'm here, in this moment, and I'm happy. And that's enough. It's more than enough.